During the chaotic years of World War II, when the world's fate was being decided on the beaches of Normandy, in the deserts of North Africa, and in the skies over the Pacific, there was another war, quiet, unseen, yet no less important, playing out in the back alleys of New York, the smoky bars of Chicago, and the sun-drenched villages of Sicily. This was a war of whispered deals, coded messages, and handshakes that carried more weight than official signatures. It began with a problem the US government could not ignore. The docks of New York Harbor, America's lifeline to the war in Europe, were under threat. Supplies, weapons, and troops passed through these waters daily, and the fear of Axis sabotage was constant. German U-boats prowled just offshore, and rumors spread of enemy agents slipping into the city through the waterfront. The Navy's Office of Naval Intelligence faced a grim reality. Much of the dockside labor force, the longshoremen who controlled the loading and unloading of ships, were already under the thumb of the International Longshoremen's Association, a union deeply infiltrated and controlled by the Mafia. Trying to purge mob influence would take years, and America didn't have years. It had weeks, maybe months, to secure the ports. That was when a radical idea took root. Instead of fighting the mob, work with them. This unprecedented move became known as Operation Underworld. Naval intelligence reached out to Meyer Lansky, a shrewd and well-connected figure in the underworld who also happened to despise the Axis powers. Lansky, in turn, opened the door to Charles "Lucky" Luciano, the imprisoned kingpin who, despite being behind bars in Dannemora prison, still commanded enormous influence over organized crime in America. Negotiations were delicate. Luciano, convicted for running a massive prostitution ring, wasn't the kind of man the government liked to be seen dealing with. Yet the stakes were too high. Through a series of intermediaries, a deal was struck. The Mafia would guarantee the security of the docks, keep foreign agents away, and maintain order among the longshoremen. In return, Luciano would receive privileges in prison, protection for his associates, and the possibility of early release after the war. From that point forward, the docks became one of the safest places in wartime America. Mob enforcers patrolled the waterfront, not in uniform, but in sharp suits and fedoras, making it clear that any problems would be handled swiftly. Suspicious faces disappeared, whispers of sabotage were silenced before they became action, and the flow of war materials continued without interruption. But the collaboration did not stop at the New York shoreline. Across the Atlantic, the Allies were planning Operation Husky, the massive 1943 invasion of Sicily. The island was a strategic prize. It controlled access to the Mediterranean and would serve as a springboard into Italy. But it was also a land of closed villages, tight-knit families, and a deep mistrust of outsiders, especially soldiers from foreign lands. The US military knew it needed inside help. Here again, the Mafia offered a solution. Many Sicilian Mafia bosses had been driven underground or imprisoned by Benito Mussolini's fascist regime, which had waged a brutal campaign to eradicate organized crime. These men harbored deep resentment against the fascists and were willing to cooperate with anyone who could help remove them from power. Through Luciano's channels, American intelligence contacted Sicilian mafiosi, arranging for local guides, intelligence on German and Italian troop movements, and even quiet assurances to villagers that the incoming Allied forces were not enemies. When US troops landed in certain towns, they were greeted not with gunfire, but with cooperation, sometimes even with feasts prepared by locals who had been tipped off. The Mafia's influence smoothed the path of invasion, allowing the Allies to advance more quickly and with fewer casualties than expected in key areas. Yet, these wartime dealings planted seeds of future trouble. After the war, many of the Sicilian mobsters who had cooperated with the Allies found themselves reinstated in positions of local authority. With fascist officials gone, the Mafia once again became a power in Sicilian politics, rebuilding its networks with a new level of confidence. Back in America, the Mafia's wartime patriotism earned it a degree of goodwill, or at least a blind eye, from certain government circles. Luciano himself was quietly released in 1946 and deported to Italy, where he continued to run operations from abroad. The post-war boom years were a golden age for organized crime, with money flowing from construction, shipping, gambling, and the narcotics trade. The Mafia extended its reach deeper into legitimate business and politics. Corruption became systemic. City council members, judges, and police captains found themselves on mob payrolls, and labor unions often took their marching orders from crime families. The government, for its part, sometimes found it convenient to look the other way, especially when the Mafia's interests happened to align with national security concerns. This uneasy coexistence resurfaced in the 1960s during the height of the Cold War. The CIA, seeking ways to undermine Fidel Castro's communist regime in Cuba, again turned to underworld contacts. Havana had been a mob code playground before the revolution, its casinos and hotels generating enormous profits for American crime syndicates. Castro's rise to power threatened those interests, and the Mafia was eager to help remove him. In one of the most bizarre chapters of U.S. intelligence history, CIA operatives met with mob figures like Sam Giancana and Santo Trafficante Jr., discussing plans to assassinate Castro, using everything from poison pills to exploding cigars. None of these schemes succeeded, but they underscored a troubling reality. The lines between government and organized crime, once blurred by wartime necessity, had never been fully redrawn. Meanwhile, law enforcement agencies at home were waging their own long war against organized crime. The 1950s Kefauver Committee hearings dragged mob figures into the public eye, revealing a web of influence that stretched from the smallest union hall to the halls of Congress. These televised hearings shocked Americans, showing them the faces of men who had long operated in the shadows. The hearings led to new laws and investigative tools, culminating in the RICO Act of 1970, which allowed prosecutors to target entire criminal enterprises rather than just individual members. Even so, dismantling the Mafia proved a slow, dangerous process. Witnesses feared for their lives, investigators faced corruption within their own ranks, and juries were sometimes intimidated or bribed into acquittals. And through it all, the Mafia adapted, moving into white-collar crimes, manipulating stock markets, infiltrating corporate boards, and laundering money through increasingly complex schemes. At the same time, Hollywood was crafting a parallel mythology. Films like The Godfather and TV series like The Sopranos romanticized mob life, portraying gangsters as complex, even noble figures bound by codes of loyalty and honor. This image was seductive, but it was a lie. The real Mafia operated on fear, greed, and ruthless self-interest. They were not protectors of their communities, but predators, bleeding neighborhoods dry through extortion, loan sharking, and narcotics. Ordinary people paid the price. Business owners burned out for refusing to pay protection, union members beaten for opposing corrupt leadership, entire families destroyed by addiction to the drugs the mob pushed. By the 1980s and 90s, the Mafia's influence had waned in some areas due to aggressive prosecutions, but its legacy and its methods remained embedded in the fabric of both American and Sicilian life. The lessons of the past were stark. What began as a desperate alliance in the face of global war had morphed into a decades-long entanglement between government and organized crime. The Mafia had learned that even the most powerful nation in the world could need its help, and elements within the government had learned that criminals could sometimes achieve what official channels could not. This mutual recognition created a shadow network of cooperation, deniable but real, that would surface whenever circumstances made it useful. The story of the Mafia in World War II is therefore not just a historical curiosity, it is a cautionary tale. It shows how the pressures of wartime can lead to compromises that ripple forward for generations, shaping politics, law enforcement, and even culture. It is a reminder that in the murky world of intelligence and power, enemies can become allies and allies can become liabilities, and that once certain lines are crossed, they are almost impossible to uncross. The war may have ended in 1945, but the deal made on the docks of New York Harbor ensured that the Mafia's influence would endure long after the guns fell silent.